Democracy Reporting International, DRI.
Honorable Chairman, honorable committee members, senators, and dear colleagues, first of all, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to present the issues that we think are important for the next general elections. Let me give you a little bit of a background. We would like to mention that observers in general elections in 2008 concluded that there were significant improvement in elections. However, many areas for progress are still need to meet international standards in elections. The EU, the European Union Election Observation Mission, proposed and articulated 83 recommendations, and all major political parties endorsed these recommendations. They're available, and we're very happy to be able to share it with you in the materials. Many of these recommendations have been addressed in the past few years. However, we would like to focus on few that we still think are very important. We did all of our recommendations, and all our work is based on international obligations that Pakistan signed and committed to, such as ICCPR, the International Covenant for Civil Rights and Political Freedoms. DRI in the past worked with the subcommittee of National Assembly for electoral reforms. The work of that subcommittee is concluded, and we are very happy to see that the Senate's special committee picked up on this work too, and that it will contribute to electoral reform. There are a number of, as I mentioned, there are 83 recommendations that were articulated in the European Union Observation Mission report. Today we will focus only on a few that we think are of crucial importance, and that without interventions in these areas, credible elections might be in danger. They're including electoral rolls, transparency, electoral tribunals, women voters, voting of overseas Pakistanis, code of conduct, and unified legal framework. And I will very briefly explain some of them, because many of my colleagues here already mentioned some of these issues. So I don't necessarily need to repeat them, but also, as you know, we submitted the presentation in writing. One of the most important ones, obviously, is being mentioned, it's being a lot of discussion in the media and a lot of confusion, is over electoral rolls. One important thing, I think it needs to be mentioned, that Pakistani voters, when they come to polling station, if they're not registered at that specific polling stations, they don't have remedies. They can't go to the district office and receive some sort of confirmation that they're indeed registered and then come back to that polling station. Once they're turned away from polling station, they don't have any options to vote. That's why we think that there should be accessible and reliable mechanism for updating and maintaining the voters list that the ECP should put in front as soon as possible, and that it should also establish permanent, some of our colleagues were mentioning permanent scheme of polling stations. We support that idea. We think as soon as possible the ECP should provide a list of polling stations, and people should be able to check on which specific polling stations they're registered. We also very strongly advocate for a complete abolition of separate voters list for Ahmadi voters, including the requirements that they swear on oath concerning the finality of the prophethood. We think that minorities shouldn't be treated separately in the voters list. One of the very important issues is the transparency of the electoral process, and that includes requirement that observers are included in the elections law, that their right to observe, national organizations that have right to observe, this should be, in our opinion, in elections law, and not allowed the Election Commission of Pakistan to arbitrarily decide which organization will be observing, which one not. The another point that many of our colleagues will be also mentioning is the transparency of tabulation. So far, we have seen very little movements on the transparency of aggregation and tabulation of results after they are counted at a polling station. We should also mention that we strongly support the participation of women voters. We also think that although international standards are not determining what is the exact number of women that should be participating, nor there is such a thing as determining number of women, we think that the international obligations do allow for special measures in case laws are not in practice allowing women to vote. And we support strongly the proposal of especially of women's parliamentary caucus and women in political parties, that the threshold of women of 10% is established under which the polling station's results should be dismissed. The last thing that I will mention, because my time is up, is that we think that voting of overseas Pakistanis, it is simply too late for that. The Election Commission, to prepare for something like this, needs electoral system and rules, which the Parliament didn't pass so far. So we don't think it's possible to implement it. And the last thing, we think that electoral dispute resolution, many of the colleagues were talking about it here. We think it's very, very important. You all know, you were candidates, that in 2008 elections, disputes from 2002 have still not been solved. And we don't think this should be the case in the next elections. Thank you for your time for today.
Thank you.